Prisca continues to tell of her time with Paul, or Paul's time with her and her husband in Corinth. She says, "The North Market Square isn't terribly spacious. The Corinthian Agora is 4 or 5 times larger, and I will freely admit that speakers spoke with no trouble in the Agora, that it was the one place in the city intended for crowds. Nevertheless, I blame Erastus for the tactics he used against Paul. They were excessive. They revealed, so I still believe, a particular resentment the manager of markets felt toward the apostle. When there were 70, maybe 80 people standing in the square listening to Paul, when he was preaching from the shaky platform of his workbench, while I held it steady with 2 hands, my face not far from his feet, when Aquila and Timothy had gone down to the harbor at Cenchreae, leaving us here in the shop alone, suddenly the mood in the market square and all its noises changed. Paul snapped stiff and ceased preaching. I felt a drumming in the ground beneath me, stallions galloping. People at the back of the crowd began to scream. I wanted to release the workbench and stand straight to see what trouble was coming, but I feared to let go because Paul might fall. I held on, hearing shouts and cursings, the clashing of metal, the thump of hard things on human flesh and bone, cries of injury. Then people were running, scattering everywhere, and here came a horse at a canter among them, and on the horse the florid, fat Erastus. Around him, driving the people away with fists and the flats of their swords, came young soldiers afoot, helmeted, armored, and armed. "Out, out, get out of here," they cried. "You're blocking the shops. Go home. Loiterers, go home." But Erastus had his eye on Paul. "You try my patience, sir," he announced, reining his horse directly in front of us. Paul on his workbench, the manager on his mount, they were eye to eye and high above me. Excuse me. My hair was coming undone, falling across my vision. Erastus drew his sword with a flourish. "Why do you insist on obstructing the commerce of my city?" he demanded. He pointed the weapon toward Paul's throat. "Once," he said, "I was merciful, but twice is once too many for mercy from me." The horse beneath the magnificent Erastus was droop-headed and sway-backed. The poor beast was exhausted. Its rider wore 2 heavy robes over his tunic, rings and necklaces, and cross-gaitered sandals at his fat ankles. Yet, though his appearance was foolish, his eyes glittered with anger, enmity. And his troops, now free of people and closing in on us, were cold, emotionless, dangerous. Paul remained direct, gazing untroubled, gazing with a strange curiosity at the manager. From my low angle, it seemed his lips were struggling with a smile. Erastus puffed his cheeks and looked away. "It is within my power, sir," he said, swinging the sword for emphasis, "to remove obstructions. I do, sir, have that power and more, to punish impertinence, to strike contempt from the faces of the arrogant." Paul believe him and come down." But Paul only scrutinized Erastus more closely, actually leaning forward and tilting his great head to one side. Erastus, the manager, caught the gesture. "Bind him," he cried. "Bind him and drag him from the city." 3 soldiers moved forward, one with ropes. "Erastus," Paul said in a soft voice and in wonder, "I know you." Lightly, he leaped from the workbench and touched the nose of the manager's horse. "I know exactly what you fear." A soldier reacted. He grabbed Paul's tunics. "Wait," I cried, but another soldier threw an arm around me from behind. The miserable horse had not so much as shied. Erastus was staring at Paul. His eyes were locked on Paul's face. "My brother," Paul said, "you fear that you're a nobody. You fear you're a nothing in this city." The soldier yanked Paul's arms back and bent his elbows around a spear shaft. Paul said, "And all because you're not nobly born. But I tell you, Erastus, God is choosing you." A soldier with ropes approached Paul, preparing to tie his wrists at the stomach. Erastus actually craned his head past the soldier to see Paul. Paul said, "You were born in slavery, weren't you? And you bought your own freedom. You are a freedman, not a nobleman. And fear imprisons you because those of noble birth have power to scorn you. You strive for some standing in the world. Oh, my brother, but there's no need, because God is choosing you now." 2 soldiers each seized the ends of the spear shaft and heaved it forward. Paul was pitched off his feet. The breast of his tunic tore. They lifted his little body, dangling from the shaft and grunting in pain. But he bent his neck and kept his eyes on Erastus, and the voice kept issuing from his mouth. "Listen," Paul said, "this is the truth. God chooses what's weak in the world to shame the strong, Erastus. God chooses the foolish to shame the wise. God chose those who are low and despised in this society, chooses even those who are nothing, in order to bring to nothing those who think they're something." I believe that only the physical removal of Paul between the 2 young soldiers finally broke the manager's trance, reminding him of the order he'd given his troops. "Wait," Erastus cried. "Where are you going? Bring the fellow back." I shook free of my own cold soldier, snatched a knife from the workbench, and ran to Paul. While his captors tried to understand the mind of their master, I cut the rope at Paul's stomach. He slipped to his knees, actually giggling. Why, the man had been enjoying this entire episode at some deep interior level. His joy was an immediate sunlight to me, and my own soul soared. We turned together to see Erastus on foot, walking toward us in all his voluminous raiment. There were hunger and an earnest appeal in the trembling of his cheeks. "Please," he said, placing palm to palm at his breast, "which God is this?"